Hi, this is Guy Wallace. I started in learning and development way back in 1979, and I semi-retired in 2023. But my current mission as a semi-retired L&D professional is to help enterprise learning and development organizations become more performance-based. Welcome to my podcast. Good day, Nick. First of all, thank you for agreeing to do this podcast with me today. Can I ask you to do three things before we jump into it? Can you please introduce yourself to our audience, give us your name and your background and what you've been doing in L&D, etc. And then introduce your tool or technique by name, and then share with us a context where this would be an appropriate tool or technique to use when you're trying to pursue improve performance back on the job.
Will do, and thank you so much for having me, Guy. It's nice to be talking to you again, formally now on your podcast. So the three things there. So obviously, my name is Nick Lawrence. I work for company Databricks. I am the global sales enablement manager there on the team there. So we have a large enablement team. I've been in enablement almost my entire career. I did start in sales, and then right before I was seeking a promotion into a more like account executive type of role, I started wondering if that was the path I wanted to go. And fortunately for me, a spot on the sales enablement team at the company I was originally at opened up. I figured I'd dip my toe into that water, and I immediately knew it was the career for me. I immediately, loved everything about it. And from there, I got certified. My first certification was in instructional design, and I'm pleased to, when I look back on that, I still have like the manuals on my desk, still a very performance focused certification that I got. And I actually, when I went into it, when I left it, I was kind of a little bit bummed out. I was like, I thought they were going to teach me how to build cool courses and articulate and like do some video editing. I don't even know how to make a course, but it was extremely helpful looking back to it. What the principles that they taught. In fact, one of the tools or techniques came from that, and I think it'll be very very similar, or very you'll notice it. I think from being exposed to some of your work, there's some similarities there.
Okay.
So I did get certified there initially, and then eventually started getting some other, trying to get some other, certifications. I eventually got certified in the Kirkpatrick model, which at the very least introduced me or opened my eyes to the fact that, maybe this whole when there is a problem, it's not always knowledge and skill, and training can only get you so far. So I am grateful for the Kirkpatrick training that I did get, where it did open my eyes about how important it is to take a more holistic view, and how training is only going to take you so far. And so that was useful to try to kind of broaden my horizon. And through that kind of realization, I think just through trying to figure out, how do I scale this? How do I actually get to performance and scale it? Of course, eventually just started getting more into, performance improvement technology, things I started getting into. So one of the first books I read on the topic was probably the very first book you would probably recommend. I started with Human Competence by Tom Gilbert, and from there, again, my eyes opened up even more that time. So between him and a lot of the work that you post, and work by Rumler for an example, so starting to my journey really started with, if they're not performing if there's a performance problem, they just don't know enough. They don't have the knowledge and skills. And surely if we gave them the right type of education or training, they would be performing. And now my approach has kind of flipped on its head necessarily through the years. So that was a quick background. The second part of your question was the method, right? The tool or technique that you were curious about. So Yeah, so the one that you'll probably be familiar with, I think you call it just like a performance model.
Uh-huh.
In the certification I got, it was a model of performance. So maybe they stole it from you. I'm not sure.
I stole it from Gary Rumlers, who told his framework was the derivative that I learned from him was a performance table, and that then became a job model for Joe Harless. And then I called it a performance model. Joe Harless even challenged me at one point. Why'd you change the name of that? And I said, because I'm looking at performance with multiple jobs in it, and I didn't want to call it jobs model. So I called it performance model, and he nodded. I don't think he really liked my answer because he was a promoter of job modeling and such. But anyway, yeah, it's not unique, and there's many different language and labels for all of these things. So that's interesting. They're calling it.
Yes. Yeah, and actually, what I thought we could save some time too if there's time for it. I did want to maybe cheat a little bit. We can have two tools or techniques. So
Sure.
so one being more like a time tested one, right? The principles of it, of starting with a model of performance or a performance model, whatever you'd like to call it, and then so like the time tested principles of that, of starting there, of defining performance first, and then marrying that with like some newer methods, specifically some work being done in AI. So we've partnered with a company called Udly, who is like they provide, their main thing is AI conversation practice, but with that, right? So through with working with them, we've also been able to start developing some AI tutors paired with then the role play. And so that could be an interesting way of pairing, the time and tested of, starting with a model of performance, deriving the knowledge and skills, and then how do we then scale this, this instruction and practice through the use of AI.
Yeah, no, I think please do that, cover both of those, because I think this is, it's one thing to talk about something on the front end, but, then what do you do with it? So I think this is perfect, especially given, where we are in the advancements of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, agreed. And I think I missed your third part. Your third part was the
the context. So if you're going to talk about these two things, so I think this is pretty much a universal context, because you can always model performance and you can always provide some sort of a tutoring, whether it's a human being or artificial intelligence, to help people. But we can save, what the context is when you get into that part two, to talk about, your specific use of this, and hopefully that's an example that other people can adopt or adapt from.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. From a situational standpoint, when to do this, I think as early as possible in the analysis. Again, so the way in which my analysis questions have evolved over the years, it used to start with, what do you want them to know? That eventually evolved into, what do you want them to do? And now I've been leading with, what do you want them to produce? Right. So you would probably, you and Harless and Rumler would probably appreciate that language of trying to understand that the behavior or the knowledge they have is not the end goal here. Right. So if there is any request, like regardless, even if it's an awareness level type of request, we just want them to be aware of this. It's like, that's great, but ultimately there's something that there are some actions, there are some tasks that they now need to be performing on the job in order to produce something. There's some work to be done. There is an output to deliver. And so I have been trying to, in my analysis, anytime I've been getting a request, is to try to lead them to that as thoughtfully as I can. It can
be a political landmine at times, yeah. But what I really love about that is because while Gilbert called it accomplishments, Rumler called it outputs. Now, they were in business for 10 years together, from the late 60s into the late 70s. And in their materials, you often see accomplishments or outputs. So yeah, I love that. What do you want them to know? Yeah, well, then we move on to, what we want them to do. but the doing is a means to the ends. So what is that ends? And so I love where this is going to go. So please continue.
Yeah. So once we can figure out the actual work that they need to produce, what is the output? I mean, preferably you start with the outcome, right? Or, so what is it that there must be a reason for this request, right?
Yeah.
There must, some performance standards must not be being met, or, there's some type of discrepancy somewhere. And so preferably, yeah, you could start there, but obviously that's not always realistic. But you can get closer to the end by asking the work that needs to be produced. And this has been a challenging path, even for me, to understand, well, what exactly do I mean by an output? What would qualify as an output? I like Carl Binder's definition. It's a countable thing.
Yeah,
right.
right.
I like just referring to them as as nouns, right? They're valuable things that people produce, create. They are the effects of the behavior. So just through some early on questioning, you can usually figure out what it is that the requester or your stakeholders wants the target audience to be producing or delivering on the job. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the request is applicable to many, but still, I think it's really important to define what those are. What do you want them to actually be producing on the job?
Yeah, I do like Carl Binder's approach to that. Other than because that's good for tangible outputs where you can count them. You can count behaviors. You can count the number of widgets produced and things like that. But then I don't know, decades ago, I started thinking about the intangible outputs, the results of cognitive tasks. I make a decision, or I create further questions to ask, and so we can't see those. So we can't. They're the covert rather than the overt deliverables. And most of the time, almost all the time, those cognitive outputs, the decisions, etc., lead to a tangible output. So I just wanted to interject that because I think that, yeah, the terminal output is generally physical kickable, as I used to call them, but there's these others that are not, and you can't see them, and you can't even see the people performing them, but they're happening. And Richard E. Clarke would talk about cognitive task analysis. We need to understand that, the thinking behind the doing. But anyway, so enough of that aside. Please continue.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'll get to this. I'll get to the second step after I define the output. But a quick plug, even for the reasoning behind them, is whether in enablement, like sales enablement or L&D function, like the hardest part. One of the biggest challenges we have is trying to demonstrate and prove our impact. And I think our large reason for that is because we typically start with general knowledge and skills, or we're teaching by the subject matter.
Yeah.
It's subject matter based instruction, right? Or so one topic at a time usually. The problem with that is so in a sales context, oftentimes a lot of the topics you might teach somebody or train somebody on are the product, the personas, the processes, the methodology, the competitors. These are all topics. The problem is, like, all of those topics can be applied in so many different contexts and situations, and in fact they are when you're creating an account plan. All 5 of those things are relevant or are being applied in some way. But and then when you're trying to craft an email, and when you're trying to do a cold call, or when you're trying to facilitate a first meeting or do proper discovery, it's like that. All of those knowledge points are still being applied in some way.
Yeah. So
the problem when you're just simply let's teach them or enable them on these topics is you have cut off, you've put the blinders on, you've cut the thread basically. There's no possible way you could ever say, oh, and now here are all the specific ways in which they're applying these knowledge and skills. You can't do it. And so the benefit of starting with a tangible output, right?
Yep.
Something that you can actually look at it. And especially, so the second point that I'm going to get to is defining its standards.
Mm-hmm.
So if you've defined what the output is and what the standards are, like this is what good looks like. Now all of a sudden you have this concrete thing that you can look at, and you could say, aha, we taught them these knowledge and skills in the context of producing this valuable work. And now, look, we have something concrete to look at and to say, hey, look at leaders or what whoever's asking for us to prove our impact. Look at we had this training or this session about this output, about this work, and now they're doing this work better. So it's a way in which you can. It's an easy way for you to connect L&D or enablement to performance back on the job.
Yeah, excellent. All right, so let's dive in. Start wherever you feel like you'd like to start.
Yeah, sure. So as far as the principles, or as far as that method goes of using it. So obviously, once you've defined what the output is, you of course want to be documenting and defining what the standards are. So again, how are you going to tell what a good one looks like? And that's also, not only is that important for future expectation setting and coaching and feedback and things like that. So downstream, that's really useful to define what the standards are, but also to further guide the next step in the analysis, which is, well, what tasks or actions do they need to apply? Because if you don't define the output, you don't have as much clarity or direction as to what the specific tasks and actions should be. But if you say this is the output and it needs to be produced to these standards, now you can have a much more clarity to be like, okay, then if it needs to be produced to that standard, these are the actions or the tasks, whatever you want to call them, that need to be produced on the job. And so the next step after defining what the output and standards are is the actions or the tasks that they need to be producing. Once you have those tasks and actions, well, I guess I'll pause, because typically I don't dive into the knowledge and skill. Typically don't dive into the knowledge and skills piece of it yet until I've identified there's a knowledge and skill gap. So after defining the output and standards and the actions, then you could do some sort of gap analysis and try to understand what makes these actions difficult today. Why aren't people doing these today? And of course, you're going to probably find a wide variety of them that range from, I bucketize them. The three buckets I use are communication, environment, and instruction. So those are the three buckets I use to try to guide my thinking as to where the gap might be. Once you do identify if there are in fact instructional gaps, so they're like, we have some, they lack the required knowledge and skills in order to perform that action right there. Then of course I'll go a step further and I'll say, okay, what are the knowledge and skills they need in order to do that specific action?
No, I like that, because I think that's, there used to be this big focus when I started in the business in '79 and the early '80s on task analysis. And I would look at examples of task analysis at local chapter meetings. And there'd be a random list of tasks. And I'd often think, oh, yeah, you showed that to your client and said, is this what they do, these tasks? And the client would look at it and have to go, well, yeah. But they were, they could have been organized alphabetically or by the length of the number of letters used in them, but they weren't connected to anything. So you could train somebody on that task, but if you didn't know what they were supposed to produce and to what standard, and of course, if you don't have that data, you can't do a decent gap analysis to figure out, so where are we okay? Where are we typically struggling? And is that an anomaly, or is that pretty much standard barrier and struggle that people face? It's all very critical. So yeah, I love what you're saying here. It just reminds me of how the thought leaders talked about these kinds of things, back when I first started. And so that's what I'm hoping for, is that all of that kind of continues into the future, because I hate to see it go away.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a interesting point that you bring up, just like the amount of tasks that might be available. Another plug for outputs is there's a much more manageable set of output. Like once you define the outputs of the job, it's a much more manageable list of things to be trying to enable and to manage for. When you start making behaviors, for an example, or competencies, your goal, and you have a big long list of behaviors or competencies or skills, it just becomes so unmanageable
Yeah.
to try to, because it's so much, and it's like, and how granular are we getting here? But when you just focus on the most valuable work outputs, it becomes a lot more realistic.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's the whole narrowing the focus. I like to say that, start with the end in mind, not in the middle. In the middle are the knowledge and the skills and the behaviors and the competencies. You read Gilbert's Human Competence book. So the cult of behaviors is where he started on that. And that we address behaviors without understanding the context for that. And even Bob Mager's 1970 book, in the second revised edition, that was 1984. I just looked at this the other day, where he talked about, back in the 60s, he said we were focused on behaviors when we should have been focused on performance. And so all these thought leaders from back in the day all spoke about this a little bit differently, which makes it difficult for new people climbing the learning and performance curves to figure out, is this the same or different or whatever. But yeah, that's helpful to begin with that end in mind, and that terminal output or accomplishment or work product or service rendered or whatever. Lots of different language for that, and then how do you know a good one from a bad one? So I just love it. It's so critical, and there are so many people who have been doing this over the decades that there are a lot of resources for people to follow up with, to learn, and begin to master that part of the biz.
Absolutely. Yeah, I remember getting to the the cult of behavior section in Gilbert's book. And the first time I went through it, there's question marks all littered all over it, because it challenged the status quo so hard, where it was like, what are you talking? I was literally like, what are you talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're obviously, of course you're wrong. And
Yeah.
and then my question marks slowly evolved into exclamation marks and stars, and I was like, oh, never mind. Like I think I've been misled, and I think I've seen a recent post of you where you've evolved the cult of behaviors to the cult of skills.
Yeah, that's the new one. It was the cult of competencies back, for a couple decades here, 3 decades ago. But we're always caught up with this focus on the middle, and it's the educational paradigm is how the thought leaders used to explain this. We're used to education where we don't know what the student's application back in the real world is, so we can only go so far with that before we lose half the students because they go, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
So we have that mindset. If we just tell them these things, teach them these things, have them learn these things, they'll be able to figure out how to apply it, which is, the greatest misstep, I think, of the entire profession. And it goes back into the 60s.
Yeah, absolutely. Another good thought experiment I've seen you post is, this goes something along the lines of, imagine if everybody, or if all of your new hires came onto the job like preloaded with all of with all of the skills that are on your list, or all of the competencies on your competency map.
Yeah.
Would they be able to perform on the job? And I think your instinct is right, where you say no,
No.
because can they apply these skills in the context of their job requirements? And that's a different question.
Yeah, because if we learn things in isolation from the performance context, then we don't know how they're really applied and what the barriers are that you may have to avoid or work around or work right through. If we don't have that, then we're only taking the people so far and then pushing them off the boat into the deep end, and good luck to them.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so, continuing on here with that model. So I've gone through the model of performance, or at least laid it out a little bit of what it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Very high level view of the thinking around a gap analysis. And also once I get to, if there is an instruction, if I find there is an instructional gap, it's also important to view instruction as an umbrella term and to start selling that concept and to, to the stakeholders, or at least, like driving that awareness among your stakeholders that their umbrella or instruction means, multiple different things. Yeah. And I try to break up instruction along into 3 buckets and along a spectrum, essentially. So on a spectrum of instruction, it's like there's on the the left side you might have explicit knowledge, and then on the right side you have like tacit knowledge. So explicit knowledge being this is very easy for us to document, and it's also easy to apply just through that documentation. An analogy I like to use is building IKEA furniture. It's like you do not need to take a course or a training to build IKEA furniture. It's like you just put the job aid in the box, and it will walk you through how to do it. This is explicit. On the right side, like more tacit knowledge, this is obviously much more difficult to document. It's harder to apply without experience, without practice. And so continuing with this analogy here, the analogy here would be woodworking a piece of furniture from scratch. I am not a handy person. If you put a bunch of lumber in front of me with a bunch of tools and you say, hey, make us a rocking chair, I would never get there. I would like, it doesn't matter how like you could provide me with the best manual or job aid or whatever. It's just not going to happen. I would need hands-on, coaching and practice and a lot of experience before I got good at that. Especially before I got good at it, let alone build an actual rocking chair from scratch. So there's difference there in like in the knowledge. So there's kind of like a spectrum, and while that's not important to bring up during in an analysis call, right? But it's just in the back of your head. It's just like to try to figure out like I understand there's an instruction gap, but where does it fall on the spectrum? Yeah. And if it's over on the left-hand side, the IKEA furniture, obviously that's where performance support can fit in. And I think it might have been from your book where you labeled like job aids or performance support as instruction. And I remember seeing that and being, it was a new concept to me, because you don't think of, when you think of instruction, you don't think of a job aid, you're right, or a manual or something like that. But when you think about what instruction is, it is a form of instruction. And so and it's a useful, valuable form of instruction when it's warranted. When we're talking about building a piece of of IKEA furniture, it's useful. It instructs the user how to build the chair, for example.
Yes.
On the far right side, or on the far right side, this is where you actually have like more formal training. And again, this is another benefit here of viewing instruction as the umbrella term, because training right now is often used as like the umbrella term. It's like, right. It doesn't matter what we do, or it's a training. And I think be very clear and specific about what we call a training. And of course, training, is going to be something that they are not going to be able to do this thing without practice. Yeah. So I feel like that's a simple rule of thumb. I think who you would probably know this. Who gave the very visual analogy of like, could they do it if there was a gun to their head?
Oh yeah, that was the late Bob Mager, Robert F. Mager, and that was something he would say at conferences. If you could hold a gun to their head and they could do it, well, then you didn't have a knowledge and skill deficit. You had a motivational problem. And others would say, well, there were barriers that, people couldn't overcome, and so they didn't do things, or there was time pressures. And they, had to do one thing versus another thing, so they skipped something. So it wasn't really that they didn't know how to do it. It's just that there were other things in the environment that prohibited them or inhibited them from doing what they knew how to do.
Right. No, it's a useful visualization. Maybe
Yeah.
you could spin it and say,
It's
hey, the lose.
non-politically correct.
Yeah.
So whenever I say that and share that with people, I have to, preface it with this is non-politically correct, and I get
Right.
it. So, we just,
Well, maybe we could say they'll lose their job immediately, like
yeah,
if they don't do this. Like like if they don't do this thing, or
right.
could they do it, or would they do it
Yeah,
if if they would lose their job immediately if they didn't do it?
exactly.
Like then you would start to realize like how little how little of your quests actually require practice. And
Mhm.
because that's an important like thought experiment to be running. So training to me is when that practice and application piece is a requirement, and then somewhere in the middle there is education. And I've struggled with this because I was like, well, I used to think there's no value in just education in the workforce in the L&D world, like by itself, right? It's only when it's applied. But I do also acknowledge that once I was realizing that knowledge falls somewhere on that spectrum,
Mhm.
right? So knowledge or a topic could be, it could be too complex or novel or critical to rely on performance support alone.
Yeah.
But it's not difficult enough that training is required, right?
Mhm.
So there is a middle ground like somewhere, and that's where I think like more formal education and instruction can be, can still have a really relevant role. But again, I like if you were to view this, it would probably be viewed almost like a funnel where most of your requests you're getting can be filled with performance support.
Right.
Then some other things are going to be a little bit too complex, too novel, maybe too important. So it's like we are going to require some education here, and then at the very bottom of the funnel would be like training, where very few of your requests should be including formal practice, ongoing practice and training and things like that, just because of the nature of the knowledge.
So you've written about this on LinkedIn here recently, and that's where I first saw the let's see, I call it performance model, so you call it model of performance, and I kind of giggled when I saw that because it's just another example of the messiness of all of our language, and I figured out, okay, the way you described it, yeah, it's the same thing. But so I will look for that URL to that LinkedIn post here and include that in the show notes, because you've written about this, and I want to drive people into some of the resources that others have provided that will help them climb that learning and performance curve. And it's good to see different examples of this, because the world is messy and there's varied language for the same thing, and that's just one of the things people have to be tolerant of and be good at deciphering.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so is that it on your first part, your first tool technique?
Yeah, that was the first
Okay.
the first part of it, which I think is really important, especially it's even more important with like this AI craze coming out, because I'm getting bombarded by vendors, and the typical message is like create content faster with AI, and I'm like, that isn't the problem. Like that's not why enablement or L&D is getting a bad rap. Is a lack of content, or you're not giving us more content faster. That's not where the problem lies. The problem lies in the upfront work, like what's happening before the content is being designed and developed. It's the analysis piece. So and maybe AI will play a stronger role there in the analysis piece. I'm sure that'll probably come, or at least be maybe supplemented in some way. But you have to be, before jumping to leveraging AI to deploy content or learning resources or whatever it is, it's still critical to do that upfront work. So that's why I did want to start with that.
Oh, I agree. I mean, if you don't start with that, you can produce a whole bunch of stuff, and it's can be meaningful to some, but maybe just a few, but it's not going to be performance relevant. or it's going to have too much extraneous content surrounding the essential content when you don't know how to minimize your content, because less is more. And if you don't have your eye on that terminal performance and the outputs and the stakeholder requirements for those, you can't begin to decide, is this part of the content subject matter? What parts of this are needed? All of it, some of it? And usually the answer is just some of it. And the minimum is what we should be giving people in terms of the information, so we can spend most of our time in practice and feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that in mind, now jumping into like how we're starting to experiment with AI. Again, the tool we're using right now is called Udly. If anybody wants to look into it, no affiliation, but we're using it here.
Mm-hmm.
And again, the original kind of use case for it was going to be all for like the role plays and whatnot. But what I was realizing was these role plays that we were having people, we wanted our sales reps to go and have these types of conversations or handle these objections or answer these questions live on a call, with fluency. Yeah. And the problem with that is the typical approach of like, hey, we'll do an hour-long session on this content, which is dense, and it's constrained to an hour just because that's, hey, we're talking with sales reps that we can't hold them here for a day where we can't pull them out of the field. So we're providing them with a ton of information, and then we're saying, okay, now go apply that correctly during this role play. And that is where I was nervous about that jump. Like, that's still a big jump to make, is to going from from the initial exposure to the content immediately over to the role play and practicing the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So once you get to the jump there being going from the initial exposure to the content to the role play, I still saw as like a big jump. Is still a big gap to go. I would envision myself as if I was a learner, even struggling in that role play environment. So even with an AI, and it's not that they have some like practice or like it's like a safe place to make mistakes, but still it's like your scores can be captured, and so there's a layer there of right. You want to do well and stuff like that, and and also it's like you don't want to be. You don't want it. It's it's scaffolding, right? You don't want it to be so immediately difficult for them that they're not going to come back. And so I figured like the AI, like if we could insert some sort of AI role play in between these two things, it could provide some of that scaffolding. So it's like they have the yes, we're constrained by time, the needs of the business. We only have an hour.
Yeah,
fine. But after they're exposed to this initial content, then when they're ready, when they're available, they'll explore and they'll participate in this AI role play. And the AI role play it's neat. You could prompt it, you could upload. So going back, and another important piece of the deriving the right knowledge and skill topics through the performance model, right? So you start with the output task, and now it's like, okay, so now these are the specific knowledge or skill topics that we want to be like focusing on in this context, right? It's in order to do this task. And we can, with that, by providing that context and documenting that context, we can get very clear with the information that we are loading into the bot, if that's what or the AI tutor, if that's what you call it. So we're loading it in, loading that information up, so it has a little bit more of that context to work with.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was even impressed with some of the initial prompting that you can do with it. So you could customize it. So not only do you kind of tell it what you tell it what it knows, right? So that's where you're loading it with the contextual knowledge, the right knowledge in order, in the context of what we want them doing. But then you can also tell it kind of how to act as well. So I appreciated that, because if you just left it up to it before we did it, before I prompted it how to specifically be acting, it was acting a little bit, it wasn't acting like a good tutor necessarily. It was acting like a know-it-all. Right? So
Mhm.
you would say, so it would ask you a question about something, and then you would say something, and then it would be like, yeah, that's true, but also there are 5 main points you want to remember about this topic. 1, and then blah 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 blah. 2,
Yeah.
blah blah blah. And so it wasn't a good experience. So I went in, I was happy with like the editing you could do with it. So yeah, I would go in and be like, prompt it to, provide more, or just more, guidelines consistent with like providing explicit direct instruction, proper, just, basic, methods and tactics for providing instructional feedback.
Mhm.
That like, hey, don't like limit the amount of information you're pushing. Try to be pulling information from the user as much as you can. Things like that. But then also, reinforcing when there's a right answer. Look like, and so breaking up your questions so they're not so big. All that good stuff. So it was helpful for me to have that background in some of the more like in some of those like instructional methods and feedback methods. So that was definitely very useful, because I'm sure it made the tutor, because then the next time I did the tutor, it immediately was much better. It was asking me much more direct questions, in more bite-sized chunks, giving much more clear feedback with follow-up questions for me to pull and elaborate on my own knowledge. And so this is where, all of these things where it's just like, one of the struggles I've had is I'm aware of all of the research-backed methods that contribute most to learning. Things like retrieval practice, elaboration, context alignment, all that stuff. It's historically has been very difficult for me to implement and scale. In all of my program, in all these programs. And so I'm really optimistic that something like this can provide that, because it's the tutor is asking them not to select from multiple choice to recognize the right answer, but to retrieve the information that they were exposed to earlier, from memory. And so that's strengthening that connection, and it's asking them to elaborate on the certain concepts in their own words, right? Or summarizing and things like that. So all very useful to help people. And it's also correcting their understanding, like, like making the right corrections when it's needed. So that AI tutor is, I'm really optimistic about as a supplement for, it's like, yes, the needs of the business is you're usually constrained with time requirements, but we can provide this for them to take at their own pace, at their own leisure, like when they feel like they need it. And if they're finding it useful, and some of that we've been getting some early feedback in from some of the users, and it's all people are very receptive to it. It's kind of like one of the feedback was like, it's like I have my own personal like SME. Like I can go and start asking it questions. I can bug it whenever I want, and it's available. And so I am optimistic about how much it's going to help elevate the like how much people actually remember and understand these concepts, because the flood them with information approach that has plagued the industry for so long, it doesn't work. So I'm optimistic about the AI tutor, and then obviously pairing that with now go apply this in a realistic way.
Yeah, in the old days, we used to call it, cold storage training, where you train somebody on it and you can test them, and it usually was multiple choice questions. So whether they recognize the answer or not, rather than recalling it from their memory, which would then strengthen that memory. But then it would dissipate, because if it's not, you either use it or you lose it. And so tools like you're talking about, I think, have a lot of promise for spaced learning, for performance support on demand in the moment of need, in preparation for a sales call or some activity or whatever, just to refresh that. And And you can probably even, rather than it be just simply pull, it could be probably pushed where you send this out to Guy, every 2 weeks just to keep him sharp on something because you deem that as, necessary. It's like doing the fire drill. How often should you do the fire drill at a school so the kids know what to do if the fire bell goes off? So
Mm.
so some of that can be routine, some of it should be on demand, or both. And so I
Or
really
pulling,
like what you're sharing.
or pulling when it's particularly something's critical but like infrequent.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly.
Like I don't like, so sometimes it might be rare to have a certain type of conversation with a specific persona. Like
Hmm.
I if I'm a sales rep, I don't always talk to, a data scientist maybe. But when I do, I need a quick refresher.
Yeah.
And so it's really useful to be like, okay, I've got a call coming up at 2 o'clock. Let me go through this
Yep.
simulation a couple times. Let me go through the tutor a couple times. Let me practice the conversation a couple times. You can edit, you can play around with the tone or characteristics of the person. So if you want to practice with somebody who is rude and arrogant,
Yeah.
like really, really put yourself through it. You can, but that you get yourself in that mode of thinking and oh, like, oh yeah, you recall all the important pieces to be hitting on, how to reply, how to respond to certain questions and objections, and then now you feel much more competent and prepared to go
Yeah.
have that conversation that you're probably pretty nervous about.
Yeah, I mean that I think especially those kinds of infrequent things where maybe you're always dealing with, people who are happy and nice and want to talk to you, but occasionally you're going to have to talk to people who don't want to talk to you and they're mean and nasty, and so you have to be able to handle that too. And maybe if you don't know what you're getting into, what kinds of lion's den it is, you do a little bit of both, so that you're prepared for the tough questions that, are maybe difficult to answer, sometimes impossible to answer. Sometimes you need to, say, I don't know the answer to that, but I can go find out and bring it back to you. Or we can ask my bot right now and it'll tell, so I think I think at some point we're going to be able to share the fact that we have an AI buddy that's, spoon feeding us, helping us help the customer.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think there's a lot of promise. You mentioned something earlier about, maybe artificial intelligence will help with the models of performance. And that was one of the things that Dr. Richard E. Clark was working on at the University of Southern California. And he's been into cognitive task analysis for 25 years. But they were working on using artificial intelligence to conduct cognitive task analysis to determine, we can see the behavioral tasks that you're doing, but we can't see the cognitive tasks. So what the heck are you thinking? Well, if it's going to be able to do those cognitive tasks, it's going to be able to pin down the behavioral tasks too, because it can, survey or do analysis with a handful of master performers, experts, and figure out what are they doing when they're in this kind of a performance context, and what do they do differently in the next performance context, and why. And so that all can be eventually teased out and cleaned up and then packaged to help people through either performance support or to feed instructional design or learning experience design, so that we're building the right kinds of training or educational experiences, or simply giving people communications. You mentioned something earlier, and I was thinking about a lot of this depends on the prior knowledge of the target audience, and most of the time, in my experience, that varies tremendously. We've got people who know a whole bunch already, and we have people that just walked in the door a few minutes ago, and there's a wide swath there of knowledge or lack thereof, and we need to be able to have personalized learning after it's performanceized, so that we're really giving people what they need, avoiding what they already know or what they don't need, because that's not part of their job. Because we have a lot of times where we're addressing people with job titles, but their jobs aren't exactly the same because their management has configured it differently locally.
Yeah.
And AI, I think tools will help us figure out, what's the broadest set of performance requirements of people, and how is that divvied up. out there in the real world? Does every product manager or sales manager do exactly the same thing, or some of them, focused and specialized on some things, and are some of them generalists? So I find what you're doing here with the AI aspects of this is very interesting, because I think it is the future and it's not going to go away, and people need to figure out how can they use this in learning and development.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I can't imagine it being very long until it's kind of democratized and available to everybody,
Yeah.
I think once you get into more of the organizational, like your company specific knowledge, proprietary knowledge, that's where things get like a little bit like trickier. It's something Databricks, our company, is trying to help organizations with. It's like, because the public LLMs, they obviously run on internet data.
Yeah.
Like, well, you can't have those, be plugged in. You can't be feeding it your company data.
Yeah, your proprietary stuff. That's the scary part of how do you control and protect that.
Yeah.
Because if it does give you a competitive advantage, you certainly don't want to dissipate that.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So I really love what you've shared with us today about on the front end, doing the performance analysis kinds of things, understanding the performance before you worry about the knowledge and skills, because learning and development sounds too much like knowledge and skills and too often not focused on performance context and the specifics of that, and sharing with us what you're doing with the AI tool. But if I can shift gears here a moment, what I'm hoping to do with this podcast series is help people, get better at being performance-based organizationally, leadership in L&D, practitioners in L&D. So my next question here is, can you name 1 to 3 people who are also into performance improvement, where they're, it's including instruction, goes beyond instruction, who others might not know of yet? And so hopefully we can, help people find new people to follow online and make them indirect mentors or whatever. But if you could name some names for us, who would they be?
Yeah, great question. Unfortunately, in our there's probably not as many spring to life that anchor so much to that, like the performance improvement, but the ones that do, one that's leading the charge really, like in sales enablement, and this is Mike Kunkel. So I know you, I'm pretty sure you know Mike. So he actually was the first person to advise that, hey, maybe you should go look into this. I think he referred to it as human performance improvement. I didn't quite know what he meant by the phrase, or it was something human performance improvement technology. I think might have been like the way he phrased it. I didn't quite know what it meant, but luckily it led me down that path. So, but Mike, he shares a lot of good stuff on LinkedIn. He's got his own newsletter that goes out. So he's a wealth of info. Let's see some other ones that might not be as. I mean, I met recently with Bob Mosher of 5 Moments of Need, and I just really enjoyed what he had to say. And I also was able to, it was the first time I was aware of like the 5 moments of need. Like I kind of knew, I knew of it, but the way he was able to like walk me through it was very useful. And I think as AI is improving, and if people want to be like, how do I use AI to its fullest? I think the 5 moments of need model is a fantastic model to base your that design off of.
Yeah. So
Bob Mosher would be a good one. And then I suppose the last one that comes to mind, I always turn to, you mentioned him before we started recording, but was Will Talheimer. I've never met Will personally, but I think I got introduced to him first by reading performance-focused learner surveys. Was the first one. So I had very low expectations for that book. I was I got charged with or assigned to create an own kind of like the survey strategy at the previous company I was at. And I was like, all right, well, I want to know what I want to know, like what the best way to do this is. And I think it's the only book on learner surveys that's out there. So I bought it, super low expectations. I was like, this is going to be a really boring book, like a book on learner surveys. And it's an amazing book. It's so much deeper than learner surveys, as I'm sure you're probably aware. So many solid principles in there, but I think that was the first book where I was like, I looked up Will Thalhammer. He's got his own website and his own models and a ton of research that he has synthesized and made available for people to guide their efforts. So he's a great one to follow and learn from as well.
Well, thank you for that. I will include those names in the show notes with LinkedIn URLs so people can follow up with that and begin to follow some of these people, because I would agree they are all performance-oriented folks in the L&D space, not exclusively L&D, but they're all about that terminal performance improvement and measured results. If I could switch gears here again, can you talk for a few minutes on what you believe from your perspective and experience in the field here? What are some of the biggest problems or opportunities, being two sides of the same coin, I always think, in enterprise learning and development, whether it's in sales enablement exclusively or not? But what's your perspective? What are the things that the field needs to be working on and to improve?
I would say the biggest problem, or I guess maybe the root cause of a problem, would be focusing on the middle through an events-based approach. Mm-hmm. let's focus on developing knowledge and skills through events. And by events, I mean anything from a webinar, a course, a session, a live event. And so these events, it's like, I think I think it was Rumler who called it, viewing performance in a vacuum, is when you think like, if we can create an event and we'll push knowledge and skills at them, we'll get performance out on the other side.
Yeah.
And
he talked about that as pushing 50 foot of wet rope.
Yeah.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, it's a great analogy. And I think everybody in the space is probably aware of all of those like terrifying studies that keep coming out where it's like, it's usually around like the 5 to 20% range of training that never transfers over to the job, or certainly doesn't last more than a year. And I think when you view training, or when you view things as that's your goal of like, we'll focus on knowledge and skills through a series of events, I don't see why anybody else would expect anything differently. Once you realize that performance not only depends on so many other variables, but also knowledge and skills are always changing as well. So it's like, of course you're not going to be getting much juice for the squeeze if those are your focus. So instead of focusing on knowledge and skills through events, I think you're focusing on performance, or as Gilbert would say, competence, mm-hmm. the outcomes and the outputs. Focus on those via an environment. So shifting your focus from an event-based L&D or enablement to environment-based L&D or enablement, with a heavy focus on the end. And what do we want them to accomplish? What do we want them to produce on the job? Let's ensure that we're designing an environment, which might include instruction, in order to ensure that they can produce this all of the work that we're expecting them to produce. Let's ensure all those variables are in place for each one of those outputs.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for that and for agreeing to participate with me in this podcast. So I'm going to put links in the show notes to your LinkedIn URL. I'm going to find that recent post here. I think it was just a few days ago that you were listing some of the work products, the work outputs as example from the sales world, and I would encourage our audience to follow you on LinkedIn because you are one of the people who are, there's a few handfuls of people out there doing this, but in the larger scheme of things, there's so darn few who are focused on performance in the L&D space and sharing. I'm sure there's a lot of people that are doing it, but we're just not seeing their stuff because they're not out there sharing it. And there may be good reasons for that. But so I really appreciate what you've been doing in sharing so much of what you've been learning and your experiences with all of this, because I think that's helpful to those in the field who have a like mind. And you may, in fact, just help people see a new light, see a new path forward.
Yeah, thank you, Guy, and same to you. I've a lot of the recent stuff that I've been learning has come from a lot of your work. So,
and I stole it all from my mentors. So this is how it works. So everybody should feel free to do that. But Nick, have a great day, and I'll see you online.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
All right. Cheers.